Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today, we are starting our award season chat with the two stars of the upcoming Netflix film Passing and its director, Rebecca Hall. Uh, Welcome, forever Africa Best Supporting Actress, Tessa Thompson, Best Actress, Ruth Negga, and Rebecca Hall. I'm sure we'll be seeing you next year at our award show. We're going to kick things off by introducing you to the AFCA members who are on the call today, beginning with Kim Singleton in New York, Jill Monroe in Los Angeles, Ruben Regaud in Miami, Dana Abercrombie in New York, Rhonda Rasha Penrice in Atlanta, and soon to join Kim Ford. Kim, you're right on time, also in Atlanta. I'm going to let you guys do what you do so well, and I will see you on the other.
Hi, hello, ladies. I'm Kim Singleton out of New York City, considered Black-lit television show and podcast, and I'm a huge fan of Nella Larson and her novel Passing. So I was super excited to find out that it was becoming a film. It has all the isms, sexism, classism, racism that they address. So my initial question is for Tessa and Ruth. As fair-skinned women of color, how did you connect with their characters? In other words, do you have any real life experiences that directly relate to some of the experiences that Claire and Irene had in the movie?
No, not direct experiences, but I think maybe in terms of, because I grew up in sometimes, because I lived in a lot of different places, sometimes in very white environments, and I think I kind of understood vis-a-vis Claire, that sort of, I understood the sort of maybe longing or for Black people, you know, around me. It's really, that simple, really. And to see other people like me, I think those things are very important when one is young. It's about affirmation, reaffirmation, and also the idea of belonging and perhaps not loving sticking out in a crowd, experiencing exoticism, but I never felt I was hiding. I never felt that aspect of what Claire goes through. And I never felt, you know, that complete severance from one's community, and that kind of people call it a chosen exile passing, but it's not really a chosen exile, is it? It's a sort of feeling that you can only have access to certain environments, economic access, that is what passing would give you. So I suppose that I had to sort of use the magic what if, a lot, to this idea of being, about passing interests me is the idea of the exile, living what could perhaps be a very lonely existence, keeping a secret about your identity, who you truly are, and the burden of that on one's self, one's psychology, and psyche, and also the fear that people must have lived with, of being found out, and the potential humiliation of that one might experience of that, and also the actual physical danger of being found out at that time. So, yeah.
I'm not sure that there was, I mean, working on the film brought so much up. I think there were a lot of reasons, and I don't want to speak for you, Rebecca, but I know there were a lot of reasons why you decided to put the film in black and white, which had to do with story. And I'm sure Rebecca will speak to that on this call, so I won't go into it. But certainly one of the things that black and white affords us is that Ruth and I you know, to a modern sensibility are not two Black women that could pass. But when you sort of remove the color out of it, I think it helps and anchors our performances. And while to a modern world, I don't have the choice, I wouldn't have had the choice to pass in this world. I really love to work on pieces that allow us to interrogate self. And I think as a Black American, I'm constantly asking myself, if I were, first of all, there's no time to be Black like the present, and this isn't even the perfect time to be Black. But I think about, like, if I were a Black woman, you know, 50 years ago, what kind of Black woman would I have been? And certainly with playing Irene, who has this idea of sort of that she's, you know, has this moral responsibility to her race. She'll pass maybe once or twice for convenience, but is something she would never do. She has this real moral high ground. She, in some ways, is unwilling, for example, to talk about the race problem in her house, to acknowledge that her sons are young Black boys and what that means to them. And so I appreciated the opportunity to think again around how I show up in this present moment. And while, like Irene, I count myself as a Black woman that wouldn't have passed necessarily for privilege, I also have to interrogate that as a light-skinned Black woman, and particularly a light-skinned Black woman working inside of Hollywood, I am given privilege just because of my light skin. And that's something that is real. If you look at the history of Hollywood films, and while I feel like an intense amount of gratitude to get to be in a film like this that never would have been made in the time films of this style, noirs, were made. There wouldn't have been two Black women that get to top line a film like this. I also have to acknowledge that the opportunities for Black women, Black actresses that are, you know, not as fair as I am, as fair as Ruth are, that there's still a scarcity of opportunity. And so that's something that I think is real and will be probably a part of the conversation that this film brings up for many people, particularly for Black viewers. And that's a conversation that I think is really important to have, and a conversation that I'm open to having. And, you know, I think that I really appreciate having the opportunity to work on things that do feel, you know, personal in that way, and do feel connected to having to really ask myself questions and as I said, interrogate self. So I'm not sure that directly answers your question, but that's the closest that's the closest thing that your question brings up for me, if that makes sense to you, Kim.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for your honesty, ladies, and great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dana Abercrombie from the Coalition. My question is for Rebecca Hall. What I absolutely loved about this movie was how it builds on tension, and there's different moments and different kinds. We have the quiet moments from the opening, from the very beginning in the restaurant, to the very loud moments with Alexander Skarsgård. Can you please talk about the choices that you made and how to decide which tension, which level to go on?
Great question. And I'm so glad that you picked up on the soundscape, because it was a huge part of my thinking about the movie. I mean, you know, I think Kim spoke about knowing the book, so I know some of you have read the book, but there is one of the great problems about adapting this book was very little happens on the surface. Everything is subtextual and there is tremendous tension. And part of that comes from watching a woman have a breakdown that she's not even aware she's having. And it's not the one who you think it's all about, it's the other one who's hiding everything else about herself. She's not hiding her race, but she's hiding a lot else. And, you know, and it's so, the book is not first person, but it has so much interiority, and that you're really examining the inside of her mind. And that was a huge problem for me to like work out how to display that on film. Not problem, it was a challenge. But like and really the tension comes from her headspace. So the revealing of it and finding the tension became a sort of a kind of sensual examination, if it were like the things that she's seeing, the things that she's hearing, like literally she doesn't see clearly. The film starts to blur around the edges. She's not necessarily seeing what the rest of us are seeing. She's becoming unreliable. But also the soundscape was enormous for me. You know, counterintuitively, I didn't want to, everyone thinks of the 1920s in Harlem as the jazz age. It's loud, it's noisy. And counterintuitively, I wanted to find a kind of antithetical space that is almost feels like the inside of Irene's mind, like her trapped experience on some level. You know, that's why you only see her, you only really see what she sees, like that street that she walks every day and the sort of monotony of her domestic existence. But also how you hear the world and experience the world is how Irene hears it. So the only example I can think of that is maybe helpful is right at the beginning when she experiences Clare for the first time. You know, I wanted her to experience her orally before visually, and she hears her laugh. And then the first thing that she sees is her crossing her legs, which is a kind of this sort of oddly erotic moment, like it, because, you know, in a way, Clare is unlocking so much sensuality and erotics within Irene that she's not even really, it's not even available to her. So I love this idea that the first thing she sees of Clare is her legs crossing, but if you, it's not necessarily the thing that you would notice, but the sound of her nylons is a piece of Foley that I like tracked down during the mix, because I was like, I want to hear the nylons rubbing against each other. And there's no way that Irene would be able to hear the nylon. I mean, she's sitting like considerably far away from her, but the sort of subliminal effect is you kind of feel that frisson because you hear that sound. And it kind of adds to that sort of sensual experience. And I think as the film progresses, that all those choices become more narratively constructed. Like I'm not really even exaggerating when I say there's not a bird tweet in the movie that I didn't decide on. It's like every piece, every traffic noise, every external anything comes at very precise moments, and the silence is very precise too. You know, it's oppressively silent at times, and all the sound people and the music people would be like, you've got to fill this up, like, what are you doing? Like, it's like, no, it has to be quiet. Like when I say quiet, I mean quiet, like nothing is going on. And that I can't really tell you particularly with any great clarity why that makes tension. It's just a sort of instinctive path that I found to creating tension with that sort of like orchestration, as it were.
Well, it worked. You did a great job. I had heart attacks all throughout, so thank you.
Yeah, that's good. I want the experience to be a little bit unpleasant.
Jill Monroe from Los Angeles, YouTube Stiletto Jill. My question is for Rebecca and Tessa and Ruth. If you have anything to add, certainly can jump in. But I wanted to know, the concept of passing is not something that the younger generation is really, I believe, familiar with, especially in terms of this. They are on the opposite spectrum with things like blackfishing and the Rachel Joanne story. So do you think that they will accept what is happening with these two characters on screen and find the empathy because of the dangers, or not just because of a lifestyle improvement, but the actual dangers and fear that also came along with this particular time period in this story?
I think they will, because it's about context. I think we all accept things that we might, you know, analytically from the outside assume that we're not going to accept. And then when the context is right, we accept it, including the constructs of race, including like these things. There's a sort of, you know, there's a lot of different ways to see people, and no one can be reduced to one thing or like one set of anything. We know this. Like, but I firmly believe that it was important for me to cast not just Black women, because I'm redressing a cinematic history that has not cast Black women in these roles, has universally, apart from Freddie Washington, cast white women. But also it was important to me to cast women that an audience, a young audience, have a fixed idea about their identity as Black. Because then I've got somewhere to go as the filmmaker. Because I'm destabilizing their fixed idea of these identities. And that is far more interesting than playing a game of like, oh, well, they look white. I mean, that's not interesting to me. But I had to sort of slightly abstract the world so that we could play that game. And that's partially why black and white. But even beyond that, I believe that in this like abstracted world that is black and white and doesn't look like the world, you will accept the story at face value because I'm asking you to. But more than that, I think you were always forced into receiving the story from a black perspective because you're seeing these women as black. And I suppose what I mean by that is if, you know, is you're aware of the imminent danger all the time. You're never for a second going, well, you know, they're okay, they're passing. It's, you know, you're always aware of the threat because how you're going to see the film, how you're going to receive the film in that headspace is if you were, you know, if you're a family who's someone leaves and crosses the color line and says, I'm white now, that family member, that family doesn't look at that person and say, okay, yes, I can see how they're white now, they're going to be fine. They only ever see that person as black. They only see their family member as black. And that's the perspective that I want the audience to receive the movie. Because it's more frightening, it's more immediate, it also it reveals a certain truth about this that I don't think is revealed when it's something else.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruben Peralta from Miami. And I think it's a beautiful challenge that you choose this story for being your first movie. And I wonder, how do you get related to the story? How did you become familiar with this book? And for Tessa and Ruth, how was the approach that Rebecca had with you guys prior to start filming and describe your characters? Because to me, it's amazing how these characters were built.
Who's going first?
At the beginning of the question.
How you came.
I'll do that bit quickly. And then, yeah, I came to the book 13 years ago. I was, someone handed it to me. I was sort of flailing around and trying to understand how passing fit into my own family history. I didn't know that at the time, I did not know that my grandfather passed. I just knew that maybe my mother was black and wasn't really saying it, is the easiest way to put it. And someone handed me the book and it was sort of like a light bulb going off. Like I had language for it and it made sense. I also had compassion and empathy. It was like an access point for understanding that my grandfather passed and then he passed, you know, my mother inherited that choice, which is essentially a decision to hide and erase a history and a family line. And in turn, I inherited that history. And the book was sort of pivotal for me in getting to grips with this and starting a kind of 13-year journey of trying to make the movie and also trying to understand and unlock and bring back some of that erased history, which I've now done. And I am, you know, very sort of awed and proud of the history that I have discovered. So yes, it's been a very long and sort of bound up with personal things kind of journey for me, but I'll let them speak.
Well, the other part of the question was for Tessa and Ruth, like how was the approach that you guys had with Rebecca to describe your characters? Because for me, it's one of the richest part of the movie, how this character were built and even the dialogues and everything and the chemistry that you guys had on screen.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I knew about Rebecca, although at that point she hadn't uncovered with the specificity that she has now, her family history, but I knew that she wrote this script coming to grips with this legacy in her family that she was unclear about, but really trying to uncover. And so that made me interested in the story because I felt like she had something personal to say with it, which I think is in some ways the most exciting place from which to make a piece of work, particularly an adaptation, because I think you have to have a really compelling reason to adapt something that is already sort of perfect in its form. And so I knew that she had the reason. And then I read the book and knew that the book was astonishing. I have never been so haunted by something ever. I couldn't move after I read it. I remember having it in my hand and looking down and going like, what do I do with it now? And then I opened my laptop and then read Rebecca's screenplay, which, by the way, she put down the book and opened her laptop and immediately started writing it. So it already felt like we were in conversation around this book in a similar way. And I thought what she did to adapt it into a visual language inside of this piece, to honor Nella, to express the interiority of these characters on the page in a way that I could see would make sense. And then when I understood that she wanted to shoot in 4:3, that she wanted to shoot in black and white, that she had storyboarded the whole film and knew what it looked like, when I understood that Ruth Negga would play Clare, who to me is the only person that could ever do it, and capture how beguiling the character is to Irene herself, it was a no-brainer for me. And I just said, I'll make this with you whenever we can make it. And then we thought we would make it sooner, and then we had to wait a little longer. And I'm so grateful that we all stayed the course. Rebecca, mostly that you stayed the course, the 13-year course, or however long it's been by the time it comes out. And also that you didn't make any concessions, because I'm sure if you were to make it sooner and in color and maybe with different people, who knows, that maybe you could have made it. And I'm so glad that you
No, it was only ever one way to make it for me.
yeah.
It was always, there's only this way for me.
See, what attracted to me to the characters, I mean, I love the book and I loved Rebecca's screenplay, and I felt so much trust in Rebecca as a filmmaker, because the passion that she felt for this book, and you know that excitement when you've read a book and the visceral sort of residue just lingers with you for ages. And it's so exciting when you find someone who has that same experience and the same kind of, I don't know, enveloping emotions that comes after you put the book down. And that was very much a reflection of how I felt. And then I found Tessa felt the same way. And so we all were sort of in communion about the energy that we wanted to be between these two women, because they're so symbiotic, aren't they? They're reflections of one another. They're like mirrors in mirrors and wheels within wheels, sort of bonded to one another. And the great thing is that I instinctively knew that Tessa knew that, and she knew that I knew that. And so when you're on that same page, it's really beautiful, because you play your character, but you know that your performance and that character is dependent on the other person. And it just works. And because it works because there's trust and deep love and admiration for each other's characters as well as our own. And that sort of makes it easeful, not comfortable, because this film isn't comfortable and these characters are never really comfortable, even when they're around one another. And I think they are sort of fated to be in one another's lives, but it's still not comfortable for them. But is love ever comfortable? I don't know, I don't know if it is. When you have a longing for someone, there's comfort in the idea that you could lose, there's discomfort in the idea you can lose them. And I felt that very strongly with Claire's feelings towards Irene. I think she found her again and she didn't want to lose her. And that's why I think in the film very much, Claire always seems to have Irene in her sights. It could be a bit scary, I mean, and oftentimes it is a bit scary, but for Claire, I think it was just that she had this sort of lighthouse gaze in Irene, and she didn't want to let her out of her sight because she felt fulfilled somehow in her presence. And I think and hope that Claire and I did that for Renee, because it felt that those invisible threads of connection throughout the whole of filming. And I don't feel my performance can be independent of Tessa's, and it's wholly better for it.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Rhonda. For Rebecca and Ruth, because Passing it will be seen on Netflix. I'm curious as to what you think the point of entry globally will be for this very American story.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think what is astonishing about the book is that Nella Larsen ends up transcending the specificity of a book about race, and it becomes actually a book about something much more universal and, well, applicable to anyone, really. I think it ultimately becomes about the sort of the negotiation that any of us have around our identity. Like where's the crunch point between the story that you tell about yourself and the one that society puts on you? And where's the crunch point between the thing that you think you believe you want to be versus the thing that you actually deep down really want, and whether you think that's acceptable enough. And that's pertinent and prescient and way ahead of its time. But I think that I hope that the film does the same thing. And I honestly believe and worked very hard to hold the ambiguities of the book in the movie. And I love that whatever personal identity you are crafting for yourself that you bring to the movie will react with the movie. And there is work that the audience has to do. It's not, there is nothing tied up and presented here. It's that alchemy is very important. And I think, there are going to be some people that come to this movie and see it as a story about adultery. There are going to be some people that see it as a story about repressed homosexuality. There are going to be some people who see it as a story about, internalized self-hatred under the systems of racism and patriarchy and all the rest of the other systems. There are going to be some people that see all of it as, these sort of social performances, and all of them are correct, and that is bigger than America.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? If you had to go to a screening of the film with one of those groups,
which one would I want to?
Like a group that feels one of those ways, who would you most want to watch the movie with? My answer is, of course, the people that see repressed homosexuality.
Yeah, I think I'd go with the queer audience all the way as well. I don't know. I think it's a reading that I love personally.
Well, the movie, the book in itself, Nella Larsen and a lot of those people had an idea of being a part of a global community. And so in the story itself, she has a child that's out of the country. And so there are those points of entry.
No, I think it's something that not many people know about Nella Larsen that is kind of interesting that you bring up, is that, she was raised, her Black father disappeared fairly quickly, and she was raised by a Danish white woman and then she spent a bunch of time in Europe. So her own personal relationship to her Americanness, to her Blackness, was frankly kind of complicated. So I think she definitely brings that to her work too. And I think you see that, you feel that.
Universality can only be really achieved by attending to the personal, the parochial, the micro. That's how you achieve that, and that's very much present in the novel and our film. If you're talking about passing in a racialized sense, then it's definitely relevant all over the country. America isn't the only country to experience passing like that. South Africa, they have had a caste system for so long, and I think that it's not sort of unique. It's not unique to America. And I think.
Sorry, I'm.
No, please.
I thought.
Yeah.
No, just chiming in because it just occurred to me that also any groups that sort of talk about assimilation in different ways, this also applies to. A friend of my mother-in-law's saw the film the other night, and he's like, a middle-aged white guy, and he says, well, you know, I'm a descendant of people who died in the Holocaust. And this brought up a lot of stuff about assimilation, Jewish assimilation for me. And I was like, I would never have even, but that, you know, was just sort of fascinating. Sorry.
No, absolutely. But I think, you know, it's relevant because of anybody who has to, this is totally about assimilation, anybody who has to, in my opinion, it's diminishing oneself. If you have to sort of denounce part of yourself or give up part of yourself, sever it, anything that is demanded, that secrecy is demanded about something deeply personal to you is universal. So many people have experienced that throughout history, and I think that's how our film echoes. I think will echo throughout the world, is that so many people will be seen by it for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I mean, even on kind of like dumb levels, I sometimes think about, and this is totally dumb and totally like, you know, me just sort of, but you know, sometimes I wonder, like, I'm obviously talking a lot about being an actor turned director, and sometimes I wonder, like, this thing of sort of finding your way into storytelling as a lady, and you're just like, well, I've got to be an actor, this is what I have to be, and you know, and suddenly getting to this point where I've realized maybe I've always wanted to direct, but I've never, the world was just telling me to be an actor this whole time. I mean, it's sort of applicable in the same way. Yeah. Kind of, you know, there's a lot of tiny and big ways that it's applicable.
Absolutely, being told what you are or should be, you know.
Yeah.
And it's all about context. It's really interesting. I mean, I don't know if you've had it before, but you know, a lot of people I know have been told, well, you know, very controversial, but you know, oh, you're not really Black, or I don't see you as Black. And weirdly, that's supposed to be complimentary, you know? I mean, I've had that experience in my past a lot, and it's all about context and how people see you and boxes that you're put in, and this constant having to be defined by other people to make them comfortable with you. And that has always fascinated me, because I really resent that. And I'm not sure if it's chicken and egg, if I resent it because of those experiences, or I just resent being told what I am by other people and what I'm allowed to be and the limits of who I'm allowed to be, just to make other people feel comfortable, because that's what passing is. I mean, the idea that a person has to pass to achieve what they wanted to achieve in life and meet their potential. And then if someone found out that they're not, you know, actually white, how does that change who they are and what they've contributed and their skills and their talents? It doesn't, but it does. And that doesn't make sense to me. And that's what I think the interrogation that we do in this film, like we've said before, makes a mockery of all these social mores around color, and which are legitimized in law, which they have been. The one-drop rule, Jim Crow, you know, I mean,
you're getting to that thing that's really like radical and amazing about Clare, is that she, you know, she's putting this mask on, but she's the most free to be herself of all the characters, ironically. You know, she takes what she wants and she names her desires and she goes and gets them. And yes, her truth is complicated and sometimes manipulative and sort of shifty, but that's her truth. Like, and she is just saying, this is what I want. And she's not diminishing or like compartmentalizing herself to make everyone else happy, you know, and that becomes the real passing, is the ways in which everybody else does that.
Yes.
And she's not, you know.
She also goes further, really, because she's even more radical, is that you sense there's a certain glee and satisfaction that she gets from skirting with this danger of codding the white community, but also, you know, questioning the fulfillment of motherhood when she says, you know, I don't think it's all it's cracked up to be. or her open desire about wanting things, or her, yeah, I think her desires, I think the thing is, the way I feel about Clare in this book is that it's dangerous for a woman of color to have desires because it upsets everything. Again, we're talking about upsetting the status quo because it's dangerous. And, you know, she wants to have her cake and eat it, but why not? Like, to me, there's no problem there, but obviously there is, because it would sort of make a mockery of everything that the white establishment has, you know, went to great pains to establish. And I think there's something quite exciting, but the tragedy is that, you know, the world wasn't ready for her. Could not tolerate someone who was that, I suppose, true to oneself. And it still doesn't. We're still grappling with that. We can't handle people's truths because it makes us uncomfortable. And then we label them as dangerous.
Hi, I'm Kim in Atlanta. My question is for all three of you. I was just curious, in addition to obviously reading the book, in your research, Rebecca, and for the film, and Tessa and Ruth in your research for the character, did you guys watch and tap into the 1947 film Imitation of Life that also, you know, deal with the same thing where she passed as white to have a better life and pretty much, you know, left her mom and she ended up passing. Did you end up, you know, tapping into that for inspiration or research?
Yeah, I watched all of them actually, because there's like there is a handful of films about passing. There's two versions of Imitation of Life. There's the one with the great and extraordinary Freddie Washington, and then there's the one later with Lana Turner and a white actress whose name I can't remember. But and then there's also an Elia Kazan film called Pinky, which is kind of very odd. And there's a lot, actually. There's a lot. And I did feel I should do my due diligence and sort of see where this sat in the kind of cinema history. And the thing that I was so struck by watching those films is just how radically different Nella Larsen's book is to those stories. Like, there's a sort of kind of simplistic moral narrative in nearly all of those movies that is sort of, you know, there's this person, they pass, they are bad, they get punished. And you're like, okay. It's sort of, and you look at Nella Larsen's book and you're like, well, you just like bust that all open and turned it on its head several different ways inside out, you know, and have made this whole other thing. So it felt like it just sort of made me realize that it sits in its own landscape, and on some level maybe there was never a film of it all this time, because you know, it's taken us a long time to get to a place of sophistication around these ideas of intersectionality that Nella Larsen was already dealing with, you know, and now I think we're ready to have a sophisticated and nuanced discussion around these kind of things. And I think maybe it's, you know, it was hard. I think even at her time, it was misinterpreted, and it was celebrated, but it was also misinterpreted, I think. But yeah, I read a lot of books and I watched a lot of movies, and, you know, I generally saturated myself in as much material as I could that felt relevant. I'm sort of pausing because I'm just sort of thinking it's sort of, I don't know how much any of that actually really went in the movie in the end, as much as just like sat in my psyche, but I guess that's much of a muchness.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way in terms of research. I found it really interesting just to think on Nella and her own life story, because in many ways I felt like Irene and Clare, two sides of the same coin. It's Nella having an argument with herself, not just about race, but I think fundamental to the differences between Clare and Irene is this very human idea of how much should I care about other humans and how I affect them. how much should I make my mode of operating have to do with my own wants and desires above all else? And how much do I curtail those wants and desires to do what I think I ought to do for other people? And I think that's a conversation that we all have with ourselves sometimes, that we have to make negotiations. And so I found it really interesting to read about Nella's life, to think about her and to think about where she hides herself inside of the novella. It felt like a satisfying way to think around doing her justice. And yeah, she felt ever present, I guess, in that way, in making this.
Wasn't it, did I don't know if I'm right, but didn't Young say that the children are very resilient, but well, he didn't say, I'm not sure if he said that, but the next bit, he talked about the most damage you can do as a parent to a child is to live an unfulfilled, unlived life.
Right.
And that, to me, I always was thinking about that with Clare. Maybe that was my way of like excusing her behavior. But you know, the more time I spent with Clare and reading, I thought, I get that, because you're basically, your legacy is to your child, or you know, or to, you know, the people who come after you, is that do not be crushed by other people's needs and wants from you. And I think that's really, really key to Black women's experience, because I think we've been sort of encouraged to, throughout history, subsume our own needs and desires, you know, and those are, desires are dirty words, you know, and I think that with Irene, I felt like, it felt like very much like her goodness, she has a certain vanity about her goodness as an upstanding pillar of the community, as a race woman, and the expectations of her as a wife and mother, and how fair is that to ask of someone, you know, and, you know, is it possible to be both? And I think it is entirely, but, you know, we're not always shown that. And we internalize so much of our environs and our environment and what we're fed. And I think that's one that I think we're still grappling with, along with, of course, colorism.
Thank you.
Ruth, Rebecca, and Tessa, you were wonderful. Thank you for extending a little bit of your time today. And we look forward to continuing this conversation as award season continues. I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot of you. This film is a blessing in a lot of ways. And certainly your performances showcase experiences that literally rip families to shreds, tore people from themselves, and are, thank Rebecca, are of critical importance, you know, not only to our community, but to the world community. On behalf of the world's largest group of Black film critics, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.